I'm not gonna ask you again. Give me that goddamn video game.
What's up, my dudes? Voidmoon here. Today, I just want to make a video about what I'm going to be calling probably the Zoomer's Guide to Why Old School MMOs Were Fun. And I know some other people did some videos on this. Let's see my notes here. The ones that I'm talking about are a video by Josh Strafe Hayes. He did a video called Why You're Not Having Fun in MMOs Anymore, and a video by MMO Bite called The Problem with Modern MMOs. I just want to give you a heads up that this isn't a response to those, and we just had similar opinions that I've held for a long time. I've been gaming MMOs for a very long time, and I want this more to be an idea of why we liked old school MMOs, because a lot of people, if you go back to those MMOs and you never played them before, well, it's not even if you didn't play them anymore. They were good in their time. Like, you can't go back to them. They're not fun as they were back then anymore. But I want to explain to people why they were fun when they first came out. But those two videos will be linked down in the description below if you want to check them out. They're really awesome and informative videos. So, first off, I want to start off that I agree with Josh's points about his big takeaway from why MMOs aren't fun anymore to you is because they were fun in a time in your life that was fun. Like, you were young, less responsibilities, all this stuff, and that kids, or as we're just talking about in this day, the Zoomers are having just as much fun as we had with MMOs in games that they play nowadays because of their age, and it's a fun time in their life. Now, I'm going to agree to this to a point. I believe that is some of the case. But I still have a lot of fun with a lot of video games, even though I'm a grown-up, miserable adult. Like, I've been putting hundreds of hours into a mod called Librum for Skyrim VR, and that is the most fun I've had in video games for a really long time. Same with Valheim. Man, when that game came out, I've loved it. I've beat it so many times. Well, as far as you can with the current early access. But let's get down to it here. So when MMOs came out, I started playing in 2003 because I didn't even have a computer until I was like 16, and that computer could not run anything, let's say. I played Everquest on PlayStation 2, Everquest Online Adventures, amazing game. But the internet was new, and basically before that, the only way you interacted with people is you called them on the phone, which is another thing. We used to have to memorize phone numbers because we didn't have phones to put them in, or like you might write them down on pieces of paper and stuff. But I held like 10, 20, 30 sometimes phone numbers in my head at all times. And once we got the internet, all of us, this is before even MySpace. Like, MySpace came out when I was like, or at least I got it when I was like 15. Before that, there was no social media. The most we had was like AOL and Yahoo, and all those were just online chats or whatever. And so we'd go home and, if we could, load up our chat room, or not even chat room, instant messenger is what they called them. And we'd have to dial up so no one could use the phone or anything, and we didn't have cell phones. And we'd just talk to our friends, and you'd meet a few friends just through the grapevine or whatever, talking to people across the country. And it was really fun, and that was the most extent of talking to people that we had. Like, nowadays, with all the social media and stuff, you have your friends on your phone, like probably like 80, 90% are people you've never met and are in different states, thousands of miles away. It wasn't like that. The most that we had was our friends in our town that we knew, that were added to our AOL Messenger or Yahoo Messenger, MSN, eventually MySpace. And then, well, let's count out MySpace because that kind of changed things. This is before MySpace. So basically it was 99.9% just people that you actually knew IRL. And so that's all you knew. You didn't have all these people. So when MMOs came out, it was like you gotta think about it. The most that we had up until then was you'd go over to your friend's house, and some of your other buddies would come over, and you'd all play like Halo, that was actually kind of far, but like, old, like just a bunch of kids on a couch with controllers looking on a little CRT, people that you directly knew and interacted with every day playing games on a couch. That's the most interaction you had with other people playing video games. And then all of a sudden, MMOs come out, and you're dropped in this world with thousands of other people from God knows where. That was the fun of the game. Like, MMOs are all, or not MMOs, but games in general are all about dopamine hits. And nowadays, the funness of a game, of an online game, isn't the new, like, interacting with people, because that happens every day. You pick up your phone, you can talk to anyone, go anywhere, like you do anything, like, on a phone. It wasn't like that before. The fun of the game was all of a sudden you can talk to thousands of people, because that was brand new. You were never do that before. You were just imagine being stuck in this little town that you were in, talking to, maybe 20, 30 people your whole life. All of a sudden you log into fucking Everquest and bam, thousands of people. And that's what was fun about the game. Can't do that anymore because that's just a common thing. So the game has to dopamine hit you in other ways. Like at first, that dopamine, in the 2010s or so, maybe a little bit before that, it switched from the interacting with people isn't the new awesome thing anymore. So they went to they started making WoW raids, the end game is like awesome. That's the cool thing to do. Like, fight these big bosses and stuff like that. And that's like the wow factor, that's awesome. But then that got old. So then they started doing things like, making gear sets, and eventually we're all the way to random drops from loot boxes, because it's got it, like, we're trying to get that dopamine hit, but all these things that we've done just build up and build up and build up because they're not new and novel anymore. So the only way we can get a dopamine hit is opening a freaking loot box and getting random stuff at it, which is not fun to old school players like me. Anyways, let's get back on track to MMOs. Back then, most people had dial-up internet. When I started playing, I was on dial-up, playing Final Fantasy 11, EverQuest. Those are the two games that I started out with and played on 56K. So since it was so slow, the combat had to be balanced around that, because there wasn't enough information going across a 56K line, which for those of you that don't even know, it's 5.6 kilobytes a second. Think about that. Like now, average in the United States, we're getting like, downloads, 80 megabytes per second. Like, just 80 megabytes back then would take you like days to download. Like, it was ridiculous. Like a song was like 1,000 kilobytes, and that took a while. So the abilities were slower. There was less of them, which seems like it would be really boring, but games weren't boring. They made them they based the game around that. So what they did is they made every class unique and interesting. And so the fun of the game wasn't the doing your rotation and trying to get the optimal DPS, which is like how you get your dopamine hit now. Back then, it was monsters were really hard, and getting to the place was hard, and finding a group was hard, and the group itself, the fun of it was the composition of the group. So there used to be roles for everything. Like there is now, there's the holy trinity of tank, healer, DPS. And basically, like in most games, if you look at the old ones, even like WoW, the game used to have be based on hate or aggro or enmity, whatever you want to call it. Different games have different terms. And that was a thing in your rotation. Like you had to keep aggro. And they slowly, over the years, have phased that out because people didn't like playing tanks, because not only did you have to worry about your aggro, you also had to worry about keeping your DPS as high as possible. You had to worry about situational awareness of not aggroing other groups, to keeping pace in the dungeon, making sure the healers and like everyone has mana. It was a lot of work, so nobody wanted to play those classes. So eventually they basically took aggro is just not even on the table anymore. They gave everyone just instant aggro. You walk into a dungeon, everything attacks the tank. Back then, no. Tank, people had to wait for you. You had to it was special that you were holding aggro. Like not everyone could do it. That was like your thing. That was a cool thing. Then you had healers, and healers healed different ways. Like in EverQuest, you had a druid, and druid's heals weren't as good as the other healers, but they had shape-shifting abilities, which could help DPS in groups. They had heal over times and damage over times spells, so they could dot up a bunch of enemies, and it wouldn't do like as much as a DPS class, but it would still make your grind faster, and the healing was mitigated by the fact that you could bring a Shadow Knight or a Paladin, which I'll get to in a minute. And then you had clerics, which were like the healers. So their heals were better than everyone else's, and the war plate and had shields, and they could resurrect you for most of your EXP debt in EQOA. I don't know how it worked in regular EverQuest, but yeah, they were like the big boy healers, but they didn't do very much damage, and they didn't. Their buffs were really good too, but they weren't the same buffs. Like druids would increase your armor and resistances from shamans, and clerics would give you like a health buff and stuff like that. So every healer had a different nuance to them, and which is similar nowadays, but it's kind of broken down into you all have the same HPS, even if whether it be shields or hots or etc. It's all going to be the same healing pretty much. You're going to be healing, your healing throughput is going to be the same, and it wasn't in EverQuest. You literally chose between having a really good healer or someone that could have like a pet or roots and stuff, and some groups would want that. And then you had, so let's go to tanks, paladins, and warriors, and Shadow Knights were all completely different. Warriors were way better tanks than paladins and Shadow Knights for like bosses and stuff, because they had like the most mitigation and they had the most armor and stuff like that, which is great for fighting a boss and stuff. But that wasn't really the end game. That was the end game thing, but it didn't happen that often. Like nowadays in MMOs, you think about it's a race to the end game. Nobody even cares about people that aren't max level. Doesn't even matter. When back in the day it was about leveling up, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. So you have warriors, they're big tanks, big boy, they can take the big hits, have tons of HP. Paladins they weren't quite as strong as warriors. They didn't have as much armor or block and all this stuff, but they had heals and they had lay on hands, and they could cure diseases and stuff like that. So when you're doing a dungeon or a grind group, which was the 90% of the game, 95% of the game was grinding, they were great, because while your healer is drinking, I guess in some games, or meditating or sitting down, whatever they're doing, your paladin could pop himself a couple heals, pop the group a couple heals, and then Shadow Knights, they were even weaker than paladins for tanking, but they did more damage. They had life leeches, they had pets, they had just all kinds of things that could make the group faster. So if you're fighting a bunch of stuff and you had a different group composition, you could use a Shadow Knight really well, because you did so much damage and self-sustain from it. Although you couldn't take the big boy hits, so tanking in-game stuff wasn't the easiest. And then you had support classes. Now support classes don't exist anymore at all. The closest that we have nowadays are like in Final Fantasy XIV. You have a bard and a dancer and stuff like that. But to be honest, they're DPS. They're basically DPS with a few buffs, basically. But support classes back in the day were actually support classes. They would give the equivalent of TP to people, or mana regens, haste buffs, armor buffs. That's all they did was buff people, which was, it's unfathomable now, because you think about it like, okay, you can buff people, but where's my DPS, like, because everyone uses damage meters and stuff, and you're like, where am I on the damage meter? I'm not up there. Like, even look at Final Fantasy XIV ARR when it first came out. Bards did, like 20% less DPS, 25% less DPS than everyone else, but they buffed everyone constantly, so that the equivalent, if you took all the buffing that they did to everyone else, they were the most damaging class in the game. But because it wasn't physically on ACT or damage meters at all, people were just like, well, I'm not doing enough damage. So they slowly made it so the buffs were less effective, and the bard itself did more DPS. But old school MMOs, having a support in your group was awesome, and not a lot of people played them, because a lot of people like, mashing those buttons and doing a lot of DPS. And since bards and enchanters and mesmerizers and stuff like that didn't do that, they only buffed other people, not a lot of people played them. So having one in your group was like, whoa, dude, we have a freaking support in our class. This is awesome. It's gonna like buff everyone. The group's gonna flow way more sanely, and those people could pool as well. which was another thing you don't even do. So back in old school MMOs, you would find a camp, and a camp was like an area with like a lot of mobs that respawned. Right, there wasn't a lot of patrols and stuff like that, because back in the days it was like little camps. It was like areas of places with like wandering monsters in some places and flora and fauna and stuff, which is kind of the same today. But you would find a safe spot where you would huddle up as a group, and then you have someone go out and pull a mob and then come back. And if they were really good, they'd wait until the mob was just about done, and they'd check everyone's HP and mana, and then they would run out. And then, so if they're perfect, what they call chain pulling, you get another mob, and then it would get back right as the other mob died. And it was a fucking talent to do that. So you had classes like rangers, bards, even necromancers could do it to an extent, more monks, because they had feign death. So if something happened out there and they accidentally pulled two, they could feign death and then get back up and come back. Or, bards could speed themselves up, run out there, they pull two, they sleep one, stuff like that. And getting like ads, getting more than one was like an ordeal. So having like enchanters that could mesmerize a second pool, you wouldn't die. It would save your party. And you had all these different classes that all did different things. And the fun of the game was when you mess up and you pull too many mobs or something happens, you fix it with the people in your group. And when you're building the group, you take that into consideration, because the next point in the old school MMOs was in-game was not it was kind of a thing, but most of the game was leveling itself. Like, it took so long to level, and it was so difficult, because most games nowadays you can go out in the world and you could just kill shit on your own, and there's quests and all this stuff, and you could level up. Not old school MMOs. There was only very few classes that could solo things, and they were say you're a necromancer, you're level 30 necromancer. You could go to a level 20 area and grind really slowly, really slowly. But if you ever try to fight anything even close to your level by yourself, you're fucking dead. Unless you're specifically built for it, which in Final Fantasy 11 they had a solo class called Beastmaster, and Beastmaster would tame other monsters to fight other monsters. But if you got in a group with them, they would take 50% of your HP or MP or XP or something like that. So they were only meant for solo. Other than that, you could not solo in the game. You needed a group. So leveling up in old school MMOs, you needed a group. So everyone was grouped all the time together. So it was constant, you talking to people. And like I said, the fun part of the game was interacting with other people, because you've never done that before. You're only in your small town. All of a sudden you're grouped up with all these people that you can't even go out in the world. You can't play the game. You got to group up with other people. So it's like an adventure. And so you're constantly learning things from other people that learn them from other things. And they're like, oh yeah, I heard about this one camp way out in MTG area. Let's go out there and fight these orcs. I heard that they dropped this yellow robe and shit like that. And you're like, whoa, dude, let's do that. And you go out there and you're fighting them and stuff. And nobody questions you, because there wasn't any way to look up online how to do these things, because back in the days there wasn't Wowhead or anything like that. The very beginning, there's the Dotbot started, or Alakazam had some articles and stuff, but there wasn't anything you could really look up. It was only through word of mouth. So it made the game feel big, and all these mysteries, to the point of when you first started playing video games, or if you see someone that doesn't play a lot of video games play a video game, we inherently know the mechanics of a game. We pick up a controller. What are the first things you do? You find the jump button, you find the attack button. You know through your head what a game's going to have. It's going to have an interact button, an inventory button. Say you're playing an RPG. If you walk up to a car, you're not going to be able to get in the car unless it's specifically built around that, and then just drive the car away. You're not going to be able to go to the kitchen and start making food unless that's already been a predetermined thing in the game. You're not going to be able to fly or something like that. The rules of the game around the genre and this. But when you're a kid or someone that doesn't play games, you have this sense of wonder, and because you don't know what's going to be in the game, so everything seems possible. So you extrapolate that into being in an MMO, and only hearing things through word of mouth, whether they be true or false, and there's no way to, figure that out, then that brings so much wonder, and it makes the world feel alive and real. And you don't have that anymore, because you can just find anything in seconds. You could go on Discord and ask someone and immediately get an answer. There was no data mining back in the day. There's no way to data mine. People couldn't do it. Like, they didn't even know what that was. So when you got the game, it just came out. Like, the MMO came out, the expansion came out, and they're like, here you go. And everyone's like, what the you know? You didn't already know the rotations of and the abilities of every single boss when it came out, which, I mean, bosses, like I said, most of the game was leveling up. So the bosses were not really the end game. Well, I mean, they were, but most of it was outside. So there wasn't like instance dungeons or anything. So like every week you knew that like a dragon would come up or something. And in the beginning, this is way before people started power gaming and stuff. Someone would see it and be like, oh, there's a dragon up. Let's try to get a bunch of people to get together and like kill it or something, you know? And people would fight over bosses and stuff like that, which seems miserable now. But considering that like those items were so rare, there wasn't people that were just decked out fully in gear or anything like that. It was 99% of the time. If you saw someone with something cool, 99% of the time, it wasn't just some in-game thing. It was like someone went down to Guck and soloed a bunch of frogs and found this cool item or like whatever, you know. It wasn't something grinded for from an in-game dungeon. Like, it was cool to have cool things that you didn't need to do the in-game thing for. But leveling now is just, it's a handicap to get to the end game to do the in-game things. And they do that so you go around the world and it makes it feel big, which doesn't make sense because like you have mostly the same experience in MMO now by just having a hub and you just queue up for stuff. Like, if the rest of the world didn't even exist in these MMOs and you just sat in town and queued up for stuff, that'd be the same for 90% of players. It would be the same as not having the rest of the world. There's no problem. But back in the day when you had to go run to camps and stuff like that, and let's talk about alternate advancement points, because they don't really have that in games anymore. Since the fun of the game was exploring and grouping up with other people, you had things called alternate advancement points, CEs, AAs, however you want to abbreviate it. Basically, so when you reached max level, you then had more points that you could get to customize your character or make your character better by grinding more mobs, which today sounds like a horrible idea. And in today's world, it would be, because you even look back at 2012, I think Paragon Points came out, and then Reaper of Souls, 2013, 2014 came out, introduced the new Paragon Points, where nowadays you don't even want to group with anyone unless you have like 600 or 800, whatever points it is, because now you see it like everyone power games, so it's a baseline of, nowadays if this existed, people would be like, looking for a group to do blah blah blah, must have 500 AAs in your character to proceed, which in today's world makes sense. But back then there was no way to check people's AAs. AAs were a bonus. Everyone was grinding them. You could tell like this people that were really strong. It wasn't just like, yeah, you're required to have this before I want to group up with you. It's more of like, whoa, this person has that. That's insane. Like, that ability costs 1,000. Like, how the hell did they get that? That's so cool. So I guess the takeaway from this is the best and greatest appeal of games that you can't recreate anymore because of how the world has changed was how new, how novel, how amazing it was to interact with people, like thousands of people that you've never met when you had never even been outside your hometown before. You know, that was the greatest thing. The MMO surrounding it, it was just a way to play with other people, and that was the fun of the game. And nowadays, that is not new or novel, so you actually have to make interesting parts of the game around it. Not that the old school MMOs did not have interesting things. I'm just saying that the mass appeal of it was the interaction with other people, and if you look at new MMOs, it's the opposite. You're interacting with people all day, every day. Anyways, getting on a game, you don't interact with people that often. Like, you get in a group, you run the group, maybe say GG and leave. That's it. Maybe you have a guild if you're lucky. Maybe you have a static if you're lucky. Most people just join the game, join a dungeon, get their gear, say GG, leave. That's all the interaction you had. Back in the day, you were waiting for a while to find a group. You found a group, you tried to stay in that group as long as possible. Like, I would find a group at fucking noon. I would not be out of that group until like 9 p.m., if not all night. Because like one person has to leave, we'll find a replacement. Another person has to leave, replacement. Just keep rotating in this group until you've been there and everyone is like, all right, well, I gotta go to bed. It was not just like, and you talk to those people because it was kind of slow and stuff like that. It was amazing. But yeah, that's basically all I have to say about why I think old MMOs were fun, and can't really bring that back because of how the internet has changed and stuff like that. But they were fun and a great time, and it sucks to know that future generations won't be able to have that feeling again. I guess the next step that we'll have the same feeling will be when like VR is like in your brain and you can neurally link with people. That's probably the only next step that's gonna have the same effect of like, because like if you think about it, like not talking to anyone and then all of a sudden thousands of people. How can you ever replicate that when you can just pick up a phone and do the same thing? It's not like, it's literally in the palm of your hands, just magic now. And the only other way I'm going to assume is in the future when VR gets really good and not like these big freaking clunky things. I'm talking about like just straight up in your brain. Okay, this video is way too long and I'm rambling at this point. Let me get your comments on down below. If you guys have played old school MMOs, let me know what your favorite parts were. And if anyone else have played Everquest Online Adventures, Hodstock, what up? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Here's some videos that I think you'll like. Peace.